Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Wine Spectator two-bottle tasting. Oh, wait, today is actually the Whiskey Advocate Takeover, and we've got two drams of scotch to try. I've got an awesome guest with me, a dear friend and a fellow worker here at Landry's. In case you forgot, Keith Goldston, Master Sommelier, Landry's Corporation. And with me today is Scott Tarwater, who I like to refer to as the beverage whisperer, Tillman Fertitta's personal sommelier and bar manager. So, Scott, welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, it's wonderful to be here, Keith, and all the viewers from Whiskey Advocate and the Wine Spectator magazine folks. Hey, listen, the cool thing here is in Houston, the weather is finally broken. We're actually seeing real fall weather. And that is, for me personally, that's when the transition happens from white spirits to brown spirits. So today couldn't be better. The weather is absolutely stunning. It's ideal to be having a little whiskey tasting. Looking forward to it. So today we kind of have this kind of cool triple D. We call it the double dram of Dewar's, and we're going to be featuring the Dewar's 15-year-old and the Dewar's 21-year-old. One of the cool things that I just want to bring to your attention, and I've got a couple of the bottles here in front of me. We're broadcasting today from the Post Oak Hotel, which is part of the Landry's empire. And within that empire, we've got a concept called Mastro Steakhouse. Our Master Steakhouse actually carries the Dewar's White Label, the Dewar's White Label scratched cask, very rare to see in a restaurant environment. We've got the 12-year ancestor that we carry here. The Founders Reserve 18-year-old that's here on the desk. And we also carry, and I know they don't make it anymore, we also carry the Dewar's Signature. So today is kind of our opportunity to see two marks from Dewar's that we don't normally have on our portfolio, but after today, who knows? Looking forward to the tasting.
Yeah, and this one for me, like one of the true pleasures of being a master sommelier is, we think it's a lot about wine, and yes, the exam is definitely focused on wine, but also had to learn a lot about spirits, beer. Basically, if it was wet and could be served in a restaurant, you had to know it. And when I dove into spirits, it was just like, yes, there's even crazier stories, more history involved. And basically the whole kind of distillation, more intense spirits it hasn't been with us as long as wine or beer. And it didn't really start to kind of make it into Europe until after the Crusades, the Middle Ages. And it was something that was, done at monasteries with monks. They knew the art of distilling. And to kind of flash forward to how did we end up with whiskey and scotch, you have to, throw a little history, politics into the thing. And when Henry VIII decided to form the Church of England, there were a lot of Catholic monks who knew how to make spirits who did not have a job. So all of a sudden, this skill kind of became available to the masses. And I think it goes all the way back into like 1400s was the first official record of whiskey being made in Scotland. And then it kind of became the drink of the masses. So it's kind of this fun thing. And it worked out perfect because in some ways it was like, how did you take your crop for the year, your grains, and how did you preserve it? How did you get the calories during the wet, cold part of the year when they might rot out? So you distill it into whiskey and enjoy it throughout the year. And it was kind of this Scottish pride thing because, England and Scotland didn't get along very well, to put it politely. And let's just say there was a lot of bootlegging. I remember one like 5-year stretch, they found over 14,000 illegal stills. And I believe that was just in one little area of Scotland. So it was kind of this behind the backgrounds, very much like how we in, the US had the bootleggers, and the moonshine. It was definitely a beverage of the masses trying to undermine the government, sneak it, drink it, enjoy it. Oddly enough, a couple things happened to kind of make it more mainstream. And you go to actually Queen Victoria and her getaways staying up at Balmoral up in Scotland and kind of fell in love with whiskey. And at that time, there was this massive amount of gin being consumed in England. And that was kind of seen as the beverage of the poor people in England. So all of a sudden, the wealthy and the elite of the Parliament or the Queen's court started drinking scotch. And that became like the beverage of choice. And then you had a couple things happen that just worked out perfect is, then the kind of blending secrets came out. So they were able to start making consistent products, and Scott will touch on that part of Scotch in just a second. So they started to have a consistent product that was available. But then there was this little thing that, oh, wow, the wine world actually affects the whiskey world. How did this happen? A little thing called phylloxera that wiped out vineyards throughout Europe, and brandy production basically got wiped out. So then you had this new beverage, Scotch, which was ready to conquer the world. Then you had a demand for brown spirits that people still wanted to drink, but there was no more brandy. So it was this wonderful, fortuitous thing that basically led to the explosion of Scotch. So Scott, do you want to touch a little bit on like kind of the whole secret of blending and, a single malt versus a blend, and how did we get here? And, why is Dewar so darn consistent and good no matter where you're at in the world?
Yeah, it's a great point, Keith. Listen, I think the blend part of the equation, I think, is absolutely fascinating. And I bet most of our viewers really don't understand that. When you take a bottle of Dewar's, and let's say this Dewar's 12 that we have sitting here on the desk, they are comprised of about 40 different single malt Scotch extractions, along with grain whiskies, and that's typically 4 or 5, and we'll talk to Stephanie a little bit about that in a minute. So the nucleus of these is actually single malt Scotches, and single malts are always built on barley. And then they're coming from various parts of the country. So Campbellton single malt Scotches, along with Islay Scotches, Highland Scotches, and Lowland Scotches are used to put together the blends for these Dewar's. And so I believe most people don't realize the strong connection with the single malt Scotch side of the world in order to put these beautiful blends together. And I think it's an important thing to note, and really has come to light, that blends, they're just not our father's blends anymore. They're not our grandparents' blends anymore. These are exotic. These are incredible. And the amount of effort that's put in to put these together to have an individual expression. But I think the important part, and I think part of Dewar's fame is that when they build these blends, they are consistent year in and year out. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Dewar's advertisement campaigns was Dewar's never varies. And that is an important key. And I think it's an important key to their long-term success. When we looked at, and you mentioned, Keith, that Scotch became highly in favor with the English, but in the beginning stages there, Scotch was found in glass jars and mason jars and small wooden casks, and that's how it was sold. But John Dewar was one of the very first to actually bottle his Scotch, label his Scotch, so that if you liked Dewar's, you were going to come back and actually ask for it by name. Brilliant idea, brilliant way to market this, and it's gone that way ever since. So a lot of firsts with these guys. I have a funny feeling that if I was around back then, I would have loved to have hung out with the Dewar's boys. Got any more cool stories, Keith?
Yeah, well, especially Tommy Dewars, who I'm sure there should be like a Netflix series on his life, because anyone who could actually travel the world and, write about Polynesia, Japan, and bring Scotch to that, the US. And it was John Alexander, Tommy Dewars, who were the sons of John Dewars, who founded the company. And it's kind of cool if you look at the top and on the logo, it's actually Gaelic for truth, but actually it's 3 Ds intertwined to kind of represent the 2 sons and the father. And it's just like, oh, you guys win for the logo. Like, that's actually a really cool logo. But Tommy Dewar's, kind of this crazy, kind of think of that late 1800s, almost like before, like, the Belle Epoque era in Paris and France, like, but that just kind of like gentleman of the world. And, thank you very much. He introduced the highball cocktail. And that is, one of the kind of the cool things. There's not a lot of cocktails that we can accredit that didn't come out of like the whole Prohibition era and the small little bars in the US. So for a proper cocktail to be around before that is spectacular, and it's delicious. So thank you very much. And then one of my favorite things is understanding the politics of it. And there was legend that it's actually truth, but that he'd sent a cask, an 18-liter cask of Dewar's Scotch to the US president at the time. And everyone in Kentucky freaked out because why is the US president drinking Scotch whiskey instead of American whiskey? But anyways, fun times, great stuff. Oddly enough, you had that boom coming out of phylloxera where the brandy production dipped. Then when everyone else got hurt really bad going into World War I, the recession, and at that time, Scotch was saved basically because of the great political experiment in the US that was called Prohibition. And I love that there was one little factoid, I think it was like in 1920, right as Prohibition was starting, there was 600 gallons of Scotch imported into the Bahamas. 10 years later, it was over 10 million. So, it was a fun little way like Bahamas, but sneaking the Scotch into the US. So oddly enough, that actually saved kind of the Scotch whiskey industry when everyone else in the world was getting absolutely crushed by World War I and the recession, whereas they actually saw their sales go up. So
let me throw in a couple of things because you happen to mention a word about politics. And I think it's also very interesting that the two Dewar sons, John Alexander and Tommy, as you had mentioned, both actually went into politics and had politics and went into very, very successful careers. Strangely enough, one was a Tory and one was a liberal. So that is kind of like saying one was a Republican and one was a Democrat. Very, very opposite sides of the equation. One last little cool, and I think this is super, super neat. The first 3 automobiles ever sold in Great Britain, one went to the Prince of Wales, one went to the Lipton family, which is the Lipton tea family from England, and the third automobile ever bought in Great Britain, Tommy Dewar from the Dewar Scotch Empire. Pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I have to say, like, talking about all this Scotch, it's getting me thirsty. And I know that
we're 2 of us.
Yeah, we're really lucky. We've got 2 amazing drams to try that are very limited production. And I might have snuck a taste while you were talking. And they're pretty darn good. But I taste a lot from the wine perspective. That was part of the exam, becoming a master sommelier, 6 wines, 25 minutes, breaking down the sight, the smell, the palate, making a guess. And all that does apply to spirits as well. But I would love to learn a little something new today. And I believe we have a master blender, Stephanie MacLeod from Dewar's, as our guest today. And I think she could probably lead us through the tasting a little better than you and I, Scott. What do you think?
I would love that opportunity. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've loved hearing you talking about the history of Dewar's and the history of Scotch whiskey. Yeah, you've done your homework, guys.
Well, it's a fun thing to research, especially as the bottle keeps going down. It's an easy thing to learn and enjoy.
Well, too, Keith, and I think it's absolutely factual. Dewar's and maybe the Usher family, they really brought blended scotches to the market and really are the pioneers of bringing blended scotches out and being worldwide. If I'm not mistaken, Stephanie, your brand is sold in 140 countries. It is one of the most recognizable brands in the entire world. So with that, I would love to have a little dram with you.
I have one in my hand, funnily enough. Yeah, I think we're going to look at the Dewar's 15 first of all, aren't we? Yeah. So if I may, the Dewar's 15-year-old blended Scotch whiskey is very dear to my heart. People always ask me, what's your favorite Dewar's blend? And I don't really have one. However, this one is the very first blend that I created. It was my first project when I became the master blender in 2006. And this was created really for the Asian market, so the Chinese and the Taiwanese market. And it was created with the deliberate intention to amplify the fruity and the floral character of the Dewar's house style. And so that's what I was aiming for with this whiskey. So you'll notice that I'm tasting today in a tulip-shaped nosing glass. So that means it's wide at the bottom and tapered at the top, which means that when I swirl the glass, I'm getting all these wonderful aromas in at the top of the glass. So, you know, drinking, tasting, you know, in a old-fashioned glass like you have there is fine. But if you're wanting to explore a whiskey for the first time, then I would always recommend this shape of glass. And really any wine glass will do, but just as long as it has that particular shape. So when we nose this for the first time, it's a blended Scotch whiskey. So as you were saying, it's a blend of malt whiskies and grain whiskies. And I've specifically chosen, you know, the more floral, the more fruity single malt Scotch whiskies, along with a drop of smoky single malt in there as well, and lovely creamy grain whiskies too. Excuse me. So just to add to that floral, fruity creaminess that we get with this whiskey. And obviously it's been matured for a minimum of 15 years. So for 15 years at least, the malt whiskies and the grain whiskies have been maturing in a variety of different casks. So bourbon casks from the US, refill Scotch casks, and a generous slug of sherry casks from Spain. And so this variety of different single malts and grain whiskies, and in this variety of different types of casks, gives us this lovely richness and complexity that we get from this Dewar's 15-year-old blended Scotch whiskey. And so some people might say, you know, do you get the same complexity from a blend that you get from a single malt? Well, absolutely, you know, and that is my aim when I'm creating a blended Scotch whiskey. You know, I would hate to think that I was creating a boring blend. So, you know, my aim is always to pique the interest of our whiskey drinkers all over the world, get them talking about whiskey, getting them to share their experiences with their friends. Now it's all virtual, sadly. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get back into bars and restaurants. You know, at the moment we're on a bit of a lockdown just now. But, you know, even virtually, you know, I've had such fun just talking and tasting whiskies with my friends and colleagues and the whole world, in fact. So what are you guys getting from this Dewar's 15-year-old?
Bottoms up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your descriptors were spot on. I do love the kind of, for me, it's almost like a chamomile florality. And
nice.
then the honey notes, and, you know, maybe it was the subliminal messaging, but talking about the sherry cask.
Yeah.
You know, I get yeah, and I would argue that that's maybe the best use of anything out of sherry, but that's another, you know, rant for another day. And then also I do find it amazingly complex. And it's funny, like going through the prism of wine, the argument of a blend versus, like, say, a single vineyard.
Yeah.
And I would always describe it for the novices like a single vineyard may not necessarily taste better. It might have a more distinct personality that tastes different from other vineyards. And you can make an argument that when you blend different vineyards together, you can actually make something more complex and more balanced. And to me, I've always kind of had that in the back of my head when I think of Scotch and the blends, particularly the high-end blends, you know, versus a single malt.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, it's like I've got lots of complexity, and every time I go back to it, I'm picking up a little something else. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, and I mean, I think you nailed it perfectly when you talk about red wine blends and then Scotch whiskey blends, because this is the result that the sum is actually better than all the parts. Once they're all put together and harmonized, and then an incredible amount of time of a minimum of 15 years in barrel to kind of marry and to kind of interact. Just tremendous, and it's got a great deal of smoothness. It's got just a touch of heat. Stephanie, I'd be interested to know, because of your description in talking about some of the floral aspects to it, the little drop of smokiness, would it be fair to say that maybe the majority of the single malt portion of the blends might lean a little bit more towards the lowlands of Scotland, or am I completely off base?
Well, not so much particularly lowlands, but you're right in saying we're certainly selecting the lighter, fruitier floral whiskies, and those can come from really from all over Scotland, and it's also important to note that we double age all of our blended Scotch whiskies. Now, what do I mean by double aging? Well, that means that when we bring the malt whiskies and the grain whiskies together, we don't just send them for bottling. We take the blend and we put it back into specially selected oak casks for an additional period of maturation that we call double aging. Now, in the whiskey industry, traditionally, we call that term marrying, because in marriage, you're bringing together different personalities to form this harmonious union. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the different types of malt and grain whiskies that are completely different from one another. So it's almost like adding oil and water together. And so the double aging process allows these disparate characters to interact with one another and form this harmonious union that is the Dewar's blended Scotch whisky range.
Oh, well, it's delicious.
It's beautiful. It is beautiful. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah, and the double aging, I mean, that's a great way to describe it. But I know our next Scotch to try actually says double wood. So if maybe that's a perfect time to give us that curveball, as we say here in the U.S. What is the double wood 21 that we're lucky enough to try here as well?
Okay, so this is actually, it's a double 21-year-old. So and the reason that we call it double is because and also you'll see that the beautiful bottle, the 4 sides to this bottle to reflect the 4-stage aging process. Everything's linked at Dewar's. You'll also notice that it's 46% alcohol. So this really came about as a result of a challenge laid down to me that I was to produce our ultimate smooth whiskey, so our smoothest whiskey yet. And I thought, goodness, how am I going to do this? Because we've got double aging. Our Dewar's 25-year-old is double aged, and then it's finished in Royal Brackla casks. So I thought, what on earth can I do to make this even more smooth? So I remembered what our archivist had said, Jackie Sargent, and she talked about our first master blender, AJ Cameron. He took the whiskies from different regions and double aged them together or married them together, and then assembled the blend from these different marryings. And I thought, okay, could I do the same thing? So what I did was I took the malts, blended them together. I took the grains and blended those together, and then sent them to the warehouse for 1 month, brought them back again, put the blended malts and the blended grains together to form the blended Scotch whisky. After a month of double aging, brought them back again, And then at this final stage, I put the double-aged or triple-aged by this point, blended Scotch whiskey into Oloroso sherry casks. So the 21-year-old was put into Oloroso casks. The 27-year-old was filled into Palo Catardo casks. And the 32-year-old was filled into Pedro Jimenez casks. So this is a set of three expressions in the double range. And what I wanted was to create three distinct characters, and each one was reflecting a different aspect of the Dewar's house style. So the 21-year-old that we're looking at tonight is looking at the classic fruity toffee aromas of Dewar's, and the spiciness, and so that went really well with Oloroso. The 27-year-old was to reflect the citrus and the honey notes of Dewar's, and so went really well with Palo Catardo. And then the 32-year-old is the smokier side of Dewar's, and so that went really well with Pedro Jimenez, which is really thick and luxurious and sweet. So that's the four-stage aging process. And I think if you have a nose of our double 21-year-old, you really could go on all night nosing this whiskey and you just don't tire of it. It just glides over the nose, and when you take a sip of it, you just get all this beautiful spice. And remember that this is at 46% alcohol. So this has a more alcohol than others in the range, but still it just tastes so sweet and beautiful. All these lovely cinnamon notes coming out from the Oloroso. So lots of spice, lots of vanilla, lots of the floral notes coming through. And just a little hint of the peat smoke coming through at the very end. So, you know, I really love this blend, and I love that we've taken so many elements and brought them together, and it just gives such a compact and integrated blend. The fact that we've gone through this four-stage aging process.
Yeah, the first word, when you made a comment there, Stephanie, about the word cinnamon in the spices, that is the first thing that just jumped out of the glass. Not only on the aroma, but also on the palate. Very, very handsome, beautifully done. And it kind of cascades. It has a lot of layers. Sip number one is not quite the same as sip number two. I can see this quietly sneaking into my golf bag over the balance of the fall. A perfect dram while we're on the links.
Yeah. And I'd also like to compliment the choice to go with the higher alcohol. I find like it just, to me, it brings the finish from delicious into epic. And it's almost kind of like the end of the Lord of the Rings movie, where you think it's over and then there's another ending, and then it's over. Oh, wait, there's another ending. And it just goes on and on and on. And I just love that little extra oomph and fire in a positive way that drives the finish.
And Keith and Stephanie, the color is absolutely amazing. I mean, a rich mahogany. Very interesting to have the two glasses side by side with the 15 and the 21. But the color is just absolutely amazing. It's alluring. It kind of draws you back into the glass. Beautiful example.
Yeah, and this is non-chill filtered, and there's also no color added as well. So this is all from the cask. So all the goodness from all of the casks that have been brought into this.
So let me ask you a quick question, and this is just from me, from more of a purist side of the equation. I love just to put a drop or two of beautiful spring water in my scotches just to help kind of open them up a little bit. Do you find that, is that a good thing in your mind, or is that maybe sacrilegious in a certain respect?
No, myself, when I'm nosing in my blending room, I always add water to the whiskey. And so reducing it down to about 20 to 23% alcohol, and then just allowing it to sit for a little while with a watch glass on the top. And what that does is it allows previously hidden flavor treasures to suddenly come to the fore. So if you're exploring a whiskey for the first time, absolutely, I would always recommend to add a little bit of water. And some people add it using a dropper, but just a little, slug, and then add it as you once you think, yeah, this is the perfect strength for me. So yes, I would always recommend that. But things have changed in whiskey, and before we would have said just water, ice if you must, but don't put anything else in it. But now we say drink it how you like it. And if you want to make it in a cocktail, then you most definitely have our blessing. There's a whole myriad of cocktails on our website. And we're very proud to present our whiskies as cocktails. So don't be afraid. There's no rules in Scotch whiskey. The only rule is you drink it how you want it and enjoy it.
Well, Keith, with the mixology craze that we have really on a worldwide basis, for me personally, I would probably only drink these as is, with a little drop of water, as mentioned. I would not feel comfortable making a Rob Roy, let's say, out of the 21-year-old. I think that would be going the opposite direction of where the Scotch wants to take you. But there is a big mixology craze out there. Stephanie kind of alluded to it. Keith, is there anything in the industry or anything that's popped up recently that people are doing with single malts or with blended scotches in the mixology world that kind of comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, more and more I'm seeing people, especially when they're going to the mixology bars, trying to get the check average up. And there have definitely been some I've had some beautiful, like Earl Grey single malt kind of concoctions that work quite well. And then also too, it's a classic cocktail, but not often seen. But if you see it on a menu, a penicillin is delicious. But I'd recommend, you don't need a 21 or a 15. In some ways, just like, the 8-year would be spectacular for cocktails. And I find that for me, it's almost like a little bit more brashness of the spirit works better in a cocktail, where if it's a little bit more elegant and refined, I enjoy it on its own.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are two beautiful examples of sipping whiskeys. I can conjure up, especially with today's fall weather really starting to set in. I can conjure up a little fireplace action, a couple of drams of 21-year-old, just a nice, easygoing book, and just relax by the fireplace. Absolutely perfect sipping whiskey, maybe even a cigar at the end.
Why not?
Well, speaking of time passing, Stephanie, while we have you here, this to me is a fascinating part of your job. Is how do you mentioned that the 15, that is the youngest component of the blend. So how do you think so far in advance? Like, are you working on blends for us right now for 2035, 2040? How, in this short attention span world that we have now, for, to have a job where you're thinking that, how does that work? Explain.
Yes. Scotch whiskey is all about the long term. And this is the time of year actually when we are looking at the forecasts that go out 40, 50 years in the future. And we are thinking about the spirit that we have to fill into a whole variety of casks that will be there for us in a few years' time, 20 years' time, and way out to the future. So the whiskies that we're laying down, I may never see. And that's what the Scotch whisky is all about. It's about a legacy. It's about making decisions that will impact on future blenders and future whiskey drinkers. So we're always thinking into the future, and what we can do to make our whiskies even better in the future.
Wow. Stephanie, speaking of blenders from the past, do you know what number are you? What are you the fifth blender in about 170-year history? Where do you fall into that category?
I'm the seventh, yes, and the first woman to be the Dewar's Master Blender. So yes, it's our 175th.
A lot to be said for that.
It's our 175th anniversary next year. So we're thinking about that just now.
Wow. Well, and I didn't touch on this when we were kind of talking about the history of Scotch, but maybe it's a nice way to kind of wrap things up. But the original term, that we saw for kind of spirits as they moved throughout Europe after the Middle Ages, particularly like after the Crusades, was water of life, eau de vie. And it was really interesting that it was seen as almost an essential part of living, was having the spirit to help you when you were sick, to get your calories, just to make life bearable. And I think in 2020, that definitely is more applicable than ever. And I remember, reading in Gaelic that, and I'm sure I will butcher this, but it's like Ushis Baha or something similar to that. But in Gaelic, it even translated to water of life. Yeah. So I just wanted to say thank you.
I think the pronunciation is Uskaba, and you're right. They shorten it up to Uski, which we now say is whiskey. So yeah, you nailed it right on the head. And my goodness, water of life couldn't be a better term.
Yeah. So thank you for creating such delicious waters of life and spending some time with us. Absolutely delicious. And my day is awesome already. I don't know about you, Scott, but this was definitely a treat. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. And as we say in Scotland, slange.
Slange.
And cheers.